G'day ladies and gents, Cubic Media here. I recently participated in a Redstone building competition hosted by the one and only Sipover. And we were up against some pretty hefty competition, such as Sammy Yuri who made Ultimate Tic-Tac-Toe, Not Labster who made Flappy Bird, J2KO who made one of my personal favourites of a working claw machine, Pingu who made this battle mech tank filled with TNT flying machines that even has rolling treads, as well as so many amazing builds that I simply don't have time to cover in detail right now. Be sure to check out Sipover's video about the Redstone competition in order to see every single one. So of course our only chance of winning this competition was to do something completely absurd. Our build would also need to come from the heart. Now my channel has a very long history with TNT efficient blast chambers, from my very first video ever on this channel featuring the unbreakable blast chamber, which is definitely breakable, to the most TNT efficient blast chamber that you could possibly make using the entire blast radius of the TNT, to my most recent design, which is a recreation of the unbreakable blast chamber, except this time it is truly unbreakable, even with its own self-intelligent mechanisms to shut down if it's going to break. If you haven't seen the videos for these, be sure to check them out. But for our build in this Redstone competition, I want to focus in on an idea proposed by the one and only Smokey Dingo. Now Smokey Dingo is a bit of an eccentric technical player, doing all sorts of crazy things like filling our blast chamber with TNT, which surprisingly actually turns out to be rather effective. And having after made the most efficient TNT blast chamber possible, we hypothesized about ways to potentially make an even more blast efficient blast chamber. However, the only way to do this was to obtain a blast which is even larger than TNT. So the only natural way forward was of course to make use of the largest blast in the game, which is the blast produced when a wither transforms into the phase in which it can be hurt. So as you can see, we have these slime blocks which mimic the blast resistance of a moving block, and when this wither explodes, you can see we get an absolutely enormous blast radius. This gives us the potential to make an even more efficient blast chamber making use of withers. But then of course, unlike with TNT, once the explosion goes off, you're left with an angry three-headed monster that wants to destroy everything in sight. So obviously we're going to need a solution to handle this tiny issue. One of my solutions involved using an end portal to immediately whisk away the wither the moment that it exploded. However, as you can see, this doesn't actually work. Plus, transporting enormous amounts of withers to unloaded chunks in the middle of the end dimension presents its own challenges. The only solution was to kill the wither instantly after it exploded. And to make things even worse, this Redstone competition was meant to be done on a fully vanilla client, meaning no Lightmatica for schematics, and no options in Tweakeroo such as flexible block placement or fast block placement. Plus, above all of this, everything had to be done within 24 hours, and any mistakes would result in a wither getting loose and destroying everything. So the stakes are pretty high, but fortunately we have an amazing tool on our side: maths. Let's start with a good old PowerPoint presentation focusing on our projectile, the arrow. Now, the damage that an arrow does when it hits an entity begins at 2, but then it gets multiplied by the velocity that the arrow is traveling. This is to allow different charges of the bow to deal different amounts of damage to mobs. But our wither has 300 health, meaning that our arrow will need to be traveling at a velocity of 150 blocks per game tick. It should be noted, however, that the unit in which Minecraft measures speed is not what you might expect. It is measured in blocks per game tick, which is essentially meters per game tick. Now, each game tick is 1/20th of a second, meaning our actual speed is more like 3,000 meters per second. That is something like 9 times the speed of sound in Minecraft. So we're talking about accelerating this arrow to hypersonic speeds just to kill this wither in one shot. Now fortunately, it turns out that we can in fact use TNT to accelerate an arrow, and each TNT will impart something like 0.97 blocks per game tick per TNT. So we're talking about 155 TNT to get this arrow to a high enough speed to instantly kill this wither. But then we need to consider accuracy, because arrows exhibit this sort of weird behavior where they'll sort of track in the direction that they are facing. This is most prominent if you fire into the side of a block like so, and then if you break the block, you can see the arrow trails forward slightly in the direction it's facing, as if it's kind of a paper plane. This means that the direction that your arrow is facing is extremely important for the accuracy. We also need to consider alignment, because the knockback done by the TNT emanates sort of radially from the center of the base of the TNT, sort of like this. And if our arrow is even slightly off center, we can expect there to be some enormous amount of knockback shooting this arrow off course like so. Fortunately, it turns out that stage 2 of the budding amethyst has the perfect hitbox to perfectly align an arrow to the center of a block. So if we go ahead and get the data of this arrow, and we can see we have an X position, Y position, and here we've just aligned it to the Z axis, and it is perfectly in the center of the block on the Z axis. So we can perfectly align the arrow. However, as I already pointed out, the knockback of the TNT emanates from the center of the base of the TNT, meaning we also need to perfectly align the TNT. But aligning TNT perfectly to the center of a block presents a challenge. So if I summon some TNT with a command block perfectly in the center of a block, which is the only way you can obtain TNT perfectly aligned like this, if I get the data for this TNT and look at the position, you can see it is perfectly aligned right now. However, if I go ahead and push it with a piston like so, and then have a look at the position now, it's no longer perfectly aligned to the center of a block, and this is because the hitbox of a TNT is actually slightly smaller than a full cube. This makes it virtually impossible to perfectly align TNT to the center of a block, because of course whenever you ignite TNT, it always has this random momentum that causes it to bounce slightly out of alignment with the center of a block. So in the case that we have an arrow perfectly aligned to the center of a block, TNT cannot be perfectly aligned to the center of a block, there's always going to be some offset in the TNT when we align it. However, a simple solution for this would be to introduce another piece of TNT aligned perfectly on the other side of the center of the block, and then the horizontal momentum from both of these TNTs on our arrow will cancel out, causing it to fly perfectly straight. In order to actually do this alignment such that we don't need to worry about the precise alignment of every single TNT, we can dispense the TNT into 4 columns like this, and we can expect the TNT here to have some sort of offset in the X and the Z axis. However, if we use pistons to merge the TNT together like so, and then push it all into a central position, we can expect, if we have equal quantities of TNT in all 4 of these columns, that those 4 columns will translate to TNT aligned slightly off center in all 4 corners of the central position. The result is that the slight offset of all 4 columns of TNT will completely cancel all horizontal momentum on our arrow, which will be perfectly aligned to the center of this block. In order to perform the arrow alignment, I've gone ahead and built this machine, which will first dispense the arrow into that fence gate, and then drop it onto this carpet and pump the arrow up and down a few times to make sure that it is perfectly straight. Once this is accomplished, we'll move the arrow over into the alignment chamber, which first aligns it to the X axis, like so. Then we'll push it over, align it to the Z axis, and now it is perfectly in the very center of the block, And we get dead on accuracy every single time. This will make absolutely sure that our arrow never misses. With the concept proven mathematically, then came the Redstone build competition where we had to make it into a working machine. Is it just me, or is this machine giving off some pretty evil vibes? A little bit of decoration and a few lightning rods, and you elevate a redstone build into a red whoa build. I've just gone ahead and triggered the machine. If I untick freeze, we can see we are aligning the arrow at the very top of the column. So it gets aligned perfectly, and then our TNT is dispensed. And there goes our arrow, straight through this middle column. Grabbing the data of our arrow, we can see that its position is almost still perfectly aligned to the center of the block. But if we look at the rotation, we can see why it is extremely important to make sure that the arrow is perfectly straight when it's fired. Because this tiny deviation in the rotation has caused this tiny change in the position of the arrow, even though it was perfectly aligned to the center. As I pointed out earlier, the rotation of the arrow affects a tiny amount the direction in which the arrow flies. And given that the arrow has such a tiny hole to fly through in order to kill our wither, and a single miss will result in the wither getting loose and destroying everything, it's absolutely imperative that our arrow flies perfectly straight every single time. And just as a bonus, I've gone ahead and captured the exact moment where we accelerate the arrow using the TNT. There we go. So now, if we have a look at the velocity of our arrow. Oh my god, it's traveling at about 350 blocks per game tick. So here's a fun fact. During the redstone competition, I was kind of nervous about using the bare minimum amount of TNT to accelerate our arrow to kill the wither. So I decided to about double the amount of TNT to about 360, meaning our arrow is now traveling at about 25,000 km per hour, or 21 times the speed of sound in Minecraft. And this is me in survival in full netherite gear with projectile protection, getting hit by the arrow. That is freaking insane. Oh my god, look how much damage it did to the armor. It is so awesome that we can do these kinds of things in a block game. But let us not forget, the whole purpose of this endeavor was to make use of the wither to harvest resources in a blast chamber. For the blast chamber, we simply have a basalt generator which I designed in collaboration with Elmango just over 2 years ago. I simply expanded the design to make full use of the blast radius of the wither. In classic tradition of testing out blast chamber tech, I have the player Il Mumbo automatically placing down blocks in our blast chamber. And of course, in this design, I decided to go with dispensed TNT because, unlike with a TNT duper, dispensed TNT doesn't have any active payload which can catastrophically fail if a single explosion gets loose. This was quite critical during the redstone competition, where I actually had a few misfires which actually destroyed some of the railgun. But fortunately, without any active payload to detonate when anything went wrong, I was able to fix the problems quickly and get back on track. Let's charge up our railgun by setting the weather to thunder. This is of course an aesthetic feature made to impress the judges, and my god does it look impressive. I'm suddenly feeling very evil vibes. But let us not forget, the whole purpose of this endeavor was to make use of the wither to harvest resources in a blast chamber. Alright, that's enough dithering around. Let's unleash the beast and witness the full power of this railgun blast chamber combination. So generating our resources, in this case basalt. Here we go, our first wither. Let's charge up the railgun. Here it comes. Oh yeah. Unfortunately, I didn't optimize this blast chamber very well, so it takes a while to warm up. Oh my god, that looks absolutely sick. Here we go, another cycle. That is very loud. But hey, loud means powerful, right? Look at that, instant death for the Wither. And the best part is that our basalt generator also doubles as a nether star farm. Here I've got a simple collection system. We've got the basalt arriving here and the nether stars right here. So for this blast chamber, we have it configured for exactly 7 layers per blast, and we get 88 basalt per layer. So we're destroying 616 blocks per wither, which gives us a slightly higher blast efficiency than our TNT blast chamber. But then we run into a slight issue with the blast of our wither. So if I collect all of this basalt, this is way less than 616 blocks. Well, it turns out that where TNT has a 100% chance to drop every block that it destroys, a wither only has a 12.5% chance to drop any block that it destroys. This means we end up with only 77 items per wither. Combine that with the fact that we use 360 TNT to kill each one of our withers, and we're talking only 0.2 blocks per TNT, making this the most least efficient blast chamber you can possibly build. But hey, it's all just in good fun, isn't it, eh? Plus, I had a huge amount of fun working on this machine in the Redstone competition, so a huge thanks to Sipover and everybody who participated for making such an awesome build event. So a shout out to all those other creators who were involved, who I believe are making their own videos on their own builds, so be sure to check them out. As for me, I'll be leaving a world download for this insane machine down in the description. So be sure to look down there if you want to take a gander for yourself. Anyway, that'll be all for this video. In case you're wondering why I haven't been uploading as much recently, it's because I've started a new semester of university. And unfortunately, my study must take priority over many of the things that I do in Minecraft. Rest assured though, I am continuously working in the background on various projects in preparation for whenever I have time to release videos. So be sure to subscribe if you want to be notified of when those go up. Thank you all very much for watching, and I will see you next time.